Access Fort Wayne offers reflections of our community. Production facilities provided by Access Fort Wayne are a service of the Allen County Public Library. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting organizations. For more information about creating your own television program with Access Fort Wayne, call 421-1250.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rudy Cashman, neurologist, neurosurgeon, Fort Wayne, Indiana, at age 39 for 42 years. Tonight we have a very interesting program in our ongoing series of the mind-body connection, really. Tonight's show is about depression. Very interesting subject. I have with me two great guests, Teresa Jarrell, who works for the Recovery Center for AADP, and also I have with me tonight Colleen Freeland-Towner, who has her own business, Wake Up Vegan. So the effects of diet on depression and anxiety. And this is going to be a very interesting show. And I'm going to, at first, tell you a little bit about the history of depression. You know, how far back does it go? Is this something that Freud discovered? You know, no, it goes back thousands of years. Hippocrates was talking about it in 1450 BC. Galen spoke about it in 150 BC. It used to be called melancholy. And as we go through the centuries, what time we used to lock people up with depression. Depression is also associated with mania, and we'll discuss that. And we imprisoned some of these patients even, and then they put them in hospitals in the 18th century. And then finally, after Freud's time, we started looking at it a little differently. You know, Dr. Freud, famous psychiatrist from Austria, he thought it was due to your own thought process. So he would be speaking to people to try to talk them out of depression. Now we switched, I think, a little bit more to the biological explanation, to the neurotransmitters and the chemistry of it. So at this time, it's a very common entity in history. We have probably 10 million people who are taking medication for depression. It can be seen in teenagers. It is seen especially in the elderly. My experience in reading that perhaps 10 to 65% of the people in nursing homes are depressed. The majority undiagnosed, under no treatment. We think it's a process of aging. We think they're just not interested in anything when they don't do any activities, and they act very sad, but a lot of them could be corrected with medication. So this is a very interesting subject tonight. It wasn't till a gentleman named Emil Kraepelin, who wrote a book called A Single Morbid Disease, that we started looking at the biological aspects of depression. So let's go on here a little bit. Teresa, tell us, what are the usual symptoms of depression? Because to me, it's a masquerader. You can totally miss the diagnosis. Not everybody's lying around, you know, with no ambition and sleeping all day, and pretty obviously have a depression. It's a lot more than that. How do you diagnose it, Teresa?
Well, first of all, I want to clarify, we don't diagnose, we do provisional diagnosis. And we can look at the symptoms that the mental health the National Institute of Mental Health have outlined for us. You know, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, overenergy, lack of energy, physical symptoms such as headaches, persistent pain, loss of interest, sex drive, persistent sadness, anxiousness, anger, thoughts of suicide, suicide attempts, feeling of hopelessness, pessimism, and they're not being as far as the physical, because it does impact the physical. It affects the whole being and is often misdiagnosed as folks maybe just using too many medications, drug addictions. It's a symptoms that we need to look at, and we need to look at them properly. So those are some of those: the irritability, the restlessness, oversleeping, over-anxious, flat affect. All those can be symptoms attributed to depression.
That's a good point of yours too, is a presumptive diagnosis. It's not like your blood sugar is 800. We know you have diabetes, but we don't have a blood test here. It's an impression and a diagnosis. So many of these patients don't come in sad to see the doctor. It could be masquerade as a physical illness.
Exactly.
It could become as headaches, as pain. You have to be open-minded to it. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to help the patient out there to help diagnose themselves enough to go see the doctor. So we're going to really drive this point home a little bit. Now, depression really, I mean, there are many types, but say talking about the main ones, the other half of depression really is mania, isn't it? Hyperactivity. Could you explain us the symptoms of mania?
The bipolar, the mania, we have the extreme ups and we have the extreme downs, and folks may think that, they're doing okay and they may just, we call it bottom out, crash out, but, there's either the extreme highs that everything's going well, jet flight into paradise, Wizard of Oz, and then you have the extreme lows where maybe the thoughts of hopelessness, the guilt, the pessimism, the suicidal thoughts, the obsession of death. There's just no real balance with it. So there's just this mania activity going on. So,
and some become so hyperactive they gamble away their life's earnings, and you really have to watch for this because you can have a family member, you switch from one to the other.
Exactly.
Can't they?
And there's more impulsivity and compulsiveness, impulsive decision making, and we see that a lot with folks.
Is it a spectrum, or is there a specific line that you cross? I mean, most of us feel hopeless or too crazy sometimes. We're running around, we're irritable. I mean, we all have symptoms like that. So is depression a spectrum, or is there a specific moment when you kind of cross the line from just being normal and being ill?
It's a great question.
That's a great, and one of the things I've always said in the years that I've been doing this, and I do it with my groups, I'm not sure what normal is. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's a good definition, because what normal is for you may not be normal for me. Mm-hmm. What's normal for Dr. Cashman may not be normal for me or conducive. There is a crossing of the lines in the DSM-4, which we use, the guidelines that talk about symptoms existing for more than 3 months. There's criteria to look at. So, some of us can have one of those days where we're up and down. But when it's consistent and it persists, then we really need to look at that.
Mm-hmm. A great answer. Now, grief would be something really else altogether. Grief is generally shorter, although you can certainly be very depressed. But how would you distinguish grief in someone versus them going into a major depression? It can be difficult, can't it?
It can be absolutely difficult, and I apologize. Sometimes I used to be quick on it. I just saw a nationally renowned speaker that comes here and does a presentation for Fort Wayne every year, and I apologize with that. And grieving is stages, and there are different stages for everyone. Mm-hmm. Some people, the 3 days off that we're supposed to address those. Grief can be a year, 2 years, and there are different stages. There's the anger and the isolation, and there's the denial and those things. We're seeing much more with the anticipatory grief process, where we have family members that are dying, or friends who are going through the chemos or have been given a period of time where, we don't know when that's going to happen, but there's also the other part, we don't want to let go of them. And so grieving, where people say, well, it's a 1 or 2 year process, I'm not sure that we can really put a time span on those. Is depression a part of that? Sure. And do we need to look at that as possibly being something that we need to address? It could be shorter term, but grieving is a process.
Is it? I hope it wasn't Kubler-Ross and I missed the lecture. No, she's written some books on that. No, it wasn't her. Okay.
So,
but let me review again a little bit, because we want to get this totally straight for people out there, some of the diagnostic criteria for depression. Depressed mood, that seems obvious, and one would be that the person feels out of sync with their environment. In other words, we're in a happy environment, we're on vacation in Florida, or we're on the honeymoon, and we're just moping around. We can't have no interest in anything. We don't want to read, we don't want to go to a movie. That would be a sign of depression. Your mind is out of sync with the situation. Diminished interest or pleasure, we talked about that. Significant weight loss or gain, either one. All of a sudden, a person who just doesn't want to eat anymore. So that would be in the line of depression. Plus, could be many other things. Or all of a sudden start eating everything. Remember, food is a drug. Food's a drug. It's more addictive than cocaine. So it's a dopamine circuitry in our brain. So we could be eating just to satisfy our dopamine circuitry, just to feel good for a day, just for a day. So we use food for that. Insomnia or hypersomnia, just can't go to sleep, up all night. That can be a sign of mania, it can be a sign of depression. Or hypersomnia, we go to bed and we don't wake up for a day or two. Those can be signs of it also. It can be confusing. Or feeling worthless. Our business is doing good, we're doing good, but we feel totally worthless. It's a sign of depression. Diminished ability to think and concentrate. You can't read a book no more. You can't concentrate on your work. Those are signs of depression. And obviously, of course, recurrent thoughts of death or suicide out of proportion to what's going on in your life is a sign of depression. Let's switch to mania for a minute. I just want to make sure that you understand these, because these are important. An inflated self-esteem or grandiosity, for example. Speaking so fast and switching subjects all the time and going to other things is a sign of mania. Sometimes I wonder if my mind works too fast. Don't you wonder yourself sometimes? That you all got a touch of that. Flight of ideas, distractibility, can't stay on the subject. Increased involvement in pleasure activities. So those are symptoms. And I think now understand what mania is, what depression is, and how difficult it can be to diagnosis. Now, people can self-rate themselves also. You would like to talk about that a little bit? Or shall I go over it?
Go ahead.
You're trying to rate yourself, so sit down with pencil, paper, and have you been blue or down in the dumps a lot lately? And at this time of year, we have to worry about seasonal affective disorder, SAD. So that can be a transitory thing, but a lot of us, suffer from it. And have you lost interest or pleasure in almost all the things that you do? These are two big things. Okay. Now, then, of the next 10 or 11, I'll speak about. If you've got 3 or 4 of those, you may be depressed. Mm-hmm. And it's a self-rating scale. Poor appetite or overeating, insomnia. We spoke about that. Oversleeping. Decreased energy, fatigue, chronic tiredness all the time. And with that, some of these can masquerade as illnesses, right? As anemia is one, and low thyroid is another.
Absolutely. And
Cushing disease, a hormonal tumor, say in your pituitary gland, they can masquerade as depressions too. So you have to keep that in mind. Low thyroid and anemia are important. And are you trying to avoid contact with the company of others? Losing a social interest is a tip-off. And failure to experience pleasure when praised. Say something you good and has no meaning to you, for example. Your accomplishments in the past mean nothing. I was talking to an elderly person the other day, and matter of fact, it was in the paper, but someone pretty prominent died in town, and his wife was speaking and saying of all the great things he had done for the community. As that gentleman became older, he felt worthless. Probably having a senior depression. She had to bring out all the trophies and all the wonderful things that he had done and put them on the wall in his house. And then almost every day you could look at it, he was feeling a lot better. It's kind of interesting. And loss of self-esteem we talked about, and the accomplishments mean nothing. And poor concentration. That's sort of a self test, and it sort of leads the way. Colleen, tell us a little bit about your life, in instance in family members or children or yourself. I mean, we all have had one time or another some little, at least a depressive episode, maybe for a few days, for a month. What sort of experiences have you had?
I've had a lot of experiences. You know, as a young woman, newly married on birth control, I found myself experiencing, you know, what I would have called this, my life was in the clouds, and sought help and was determined that the hormones were making an issue. I have 4 kids, and so dealing with postpartum depression, not that I was hit with it every single time, but certainly I experienced things. And then of course when you have 4 kids and life is big and overwhelming, I've had several episodes that I would say I was depressed, and I've had several different ways that I've treated them. I feel like I'm a little wiser now and know myself and what's normal, as we discussed, or when I'm just being, you know, kind of narcissistic or sad or whatever. Sometimes it's really more than I can pull myself out of. But I have 4 kids, and so now as they're entering teenage years, I get to wonder, you know, when they're crying or school's not going well, and I can see that it's maybe bigger than what they can pull out of. But it's hard to know what's life and what's not. And then finally, I feel like my demographic of, you know, maybe young middle-aged women, and if you have health insurance and you go to the doctor, many women that I know in that post-baby kind of time of life where life is just overwhelming for really everybody. I see a lot of friends that have the diagnosis of depression or anxiety. A lot of different medications are discussed. I mean, I feel like sometimes I'm a doctor. You hear someone say, "Oh, depression hurts," or I can name the brand of antidepressant or anti-anxiety, or you should try, this drug or that drug, and it gets kind of talked about almost cafeteria style, where people then go to the doctor and tell the doctor what they want. And surprisingly often, sometimes they get it. And I think that's when you have health insurance, sometimes you have that luxury, whereas I think people that maybe don't have health insurance, maybe they have to struggle with depression. And whether or not it's always depression, I think I have different opinions on, but I know I have a lot of experience in life with depression. Or
what we're saying is it can occur to anyone,
yeah,
and in many different degrees. Let me ask you this, Teresa. Do you think the depression is overdiagnosed or underdiagnosed, or are we about right?
I think it's both. I think many times, and Colleen hit on some of that, is sometimes we have people that truly have addiction issues that will go in, and there's alcohol is a depression. Mm-hmm. Substances, the opiates, those things can cause depression, and we need to look at those as causing the chemical imbalance.
That's a big point. I used to think people have depressed, and then they take the drugs to get the dopamine up to feel good. What I'm reading lately is that the depression and schizophrenia start after they take the drugs.
It can be a little,
a little bit of both. Huh?
It can be a little bit of both. We have so many things that we're coming up with that research is spending trillions of dollars in, but just think about it, is that if you can have heart conditions and heart issues in your family and a history of diabetes, people have addiction issues and people can have depression issues, and we need to look at that. Many times that we're coming across folks when we're doing our psychosocial assessments is it the chicken or the egg? Did the alcohol and the substances create the issues with the depression, or was that happening before and they chose to self-medicate? And so we have to really, to readdress Colleen's question, it's just not being blue for one day. It is, we need to look at these chemical-free. We need to look at people changing life behaviors, patterns, nutrition. Some of these folks that are the energy drinks, the too much caffeine, you hit on the hormonal causes issues. There's thyroid that causes issues. The diabetes causes issues. Those things we need to look at, whether it's physical that might be impacting some of these issues with depression, and they can be corrected without medication.
Yeah,
that was long about.
Thank you very much. I'd like to review for a minute now so that we fully understand this subject, some hints of depression or mania. And we've reviewed them, but let's really imprint them on our brain. Loss of interest in your environment around you, not in tune with the environment, that's a big one. If you're not in tune with what's around you, unresponsive to what's good in your life, loss of energy, lack of energy, sleep disturbances, decreased sex drive, slowing down, change in movement and speech, self-reproachment, and always in a painful mood. A lot of these patients complain of pain, poor concentration, decrease in social relationships. You can see it in the school children, and starting to fail at work. They have no interest in getting a different job, or you're saying, I'm going to stop working. And explosive anger is one that we haven't mentioned before. And attacks of acute anxiety is one that is not, we haven't mentioned too much of. And a total distortion of reality, hopelessness, suicidal thoughts. These help you bring this to your awareness, and as I already mentioned, depression can just masquerade to the point it's missed. It's like the patient I had to come last night. He was I only admitted him, I think, out of mercy. He was addicted to narcotics, frankly, from taking narcotic prescriptions, and it was a hopeless situation. The emergency room, curled up in a little ball, and I had a psychiatrist see him this morning, and it's amazing. You know what he said the main diagnosis was? Depression. So I met him to the psych unit, and he made even need treatments with electrical stimulation with the ECT, and medication, of course, helps depression. And antidepressive medication, so you have to be careful before you accept that, because it affects you. And but medication, came along, and tofranil, I think, was one of the first ones that worked. Can you name the common if you saw a patient, you made the diagnosis of depression, would you start on medication every time one of them right away, or would you try other things?
Again, it goes back to what may be creating it, because there is some situational, there are some seasonal, and again, one of the first things that we look at, if some of these people are experiencing things, we want to get them to their medical doctor to see if there's something physical going on.
So you're going to rule out the medical condition of anemia,
Absolutely.
Thyroid disease, or
Absolutely.
whatever, or
they impact so much. Thyroid hormones impact, and some of those can be treated with different types of things. It would be a doctor call, but we want to rule out that there's nothing going on physically.
Physically wrong.
Laboratory tests, blood tests.
I know type 2 diabetics get depression a lot more.
Absolutely.
So things we need to work up, sometimes undiagnosed.
Undiagnosed.
Yeah.
And so we need to look at those things. And good medical doctors will do that. And then they will look at saying, maybe there is a chemical imbalance.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to look at some of the medications out there. And they can be very, very effective if they're taken properly.
Yeah. Most depression, do you consider it to be chemical, biological, caused by neurotransmitters? Not enough. The main hormones involved are norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. Those are the main neurotransmitters. Now, neurotransmitters are proteins that jump between nerves. An impulse comes through a neural cell, through an axon, then has to jump through the synapse and to stimulate the next nerve. And most of the drugs that are used today affect these neurotransmitters, dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. They either prevent the uptake to stimulate the next nerve. They prevent the uptake of that nerve to take the serotonin back, to steal it back. So like the SSRIs, for example, they keep them in the synapse, so they keep on working all the time and stimulating the nerve, so you feel good around the clock. And these different, and we've had degrees of medications, from the MOAs to the reuptake medications now, and the medications are getting a little better all the time. But there are other ways of, say, if you have a light case of depression, might you try other things like diet, exercise, and stopping, and I've tried and read enough about to get the patient speaking with them, to stop them ruminating, to start them thinking negative thoughts all the time. See, it's through evolution. Our brain reacts a lot more to negative thoughts. It stores negative thoughts because the reason people lived when the animal was chasing them and diseases were attacking them is that they knew all the dangers. The dangers are stored evolutionary-wise in the brain. So we take negative things that happen to us, store them in the brain, and we retain those. They attach to our emotional memories a lot more than good things. You can do so many good things in life, and they don't show up in your brain as much. So we, humans, through evolution, have a tendency towards pessimism. Yeah, it's based in evolutionary history. So to get a person, for example, to follow a proper nutrient-dense diet, and we're going to have Colleen speak about that a little bit. She's an expert in the vegan diet, and get people to exercise more. For example, the SAD syndrome, the seasonal affective disorder syndrome. I did not realize that it's so reactive to light. Because that's the main thing. But if you measure light in a room, say in lux figures, LUX, energy quotients, okay? If it's 100 in a room, it just amazes me that outside in the sunshine, the difference between the energy to the human brain, it's 1,000 times. It's 10,000 lux out there, 100 lux in the room. So, and of course, that stimulates the neurotransmitters. So a walk in the sunshine in the wintertime is worth its weight in gold. It makes us feel better. It causes secretion of neurotransmitters and dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. I mean, it has been thought, and Axelrod published papers in 1960, is thought that depression was a lack of norepinephrine. But it's more than that. It's dopamine too, and it is serotonin, and it is many other neurotransmitters. But there was at that time the theory of lack of norepinephrine. It kind of puts a chemistry, behind it. So to correct the SAD syndrome in the wintertime, get outside, take a walk, even with the clouds. And our patients who like living in Alaska, who just don't want to take a walk outside, they sell these lights now. $150 or less, you can put it above behind your head and lighten up. And the best time to do it is in the morning. And of course, depression is affected more by people who work night shifts and things like that. They get home, can't sleep, and their cycle is all messed up. So use a light. It can help regulate that. That's sort of interesting. Let's talk about depression in children a little bit, Colleen, you have children. Have you noticed anything with the children? There are days that they act like they're a little depressed or not,
yeah, each one has their own personality, and what are the top 5 stressors in life? Moving, a death in the family, or a divorce. I know that there's the top 5 things, and so like we've moved several times with our kids, and it's painful to watch them struggle socially. They miss their friends. You always kind of look back and remember only the wonderful things, and it takes a while to let go and embrace what's coming. And then you've just got your standard grade school issues, middle school. I mean, none of us want to go back there, and there's a reason. And so, there's a fine line between letting a kid be a kid. Sometimes you just got to cry through it. Sometimes they just need a hug. And then sometimes there really is a problem. And I know as a mom, I'm very protective of my kids. I want them to experience life and soldier through it, and not always, there's a time to cry and there's a time to put your big girl shoes on and get back at it. But then there's a time when it's bigger than you. And that's a hard thing as a mom. And I'm sure as a doctor who doesn't know my child, how much more difficult it would be to do an accurate diagnosis.
Yeah, and I remind people that children do indeed develop things like fibromyalgia. which is generally considered a stress condition, but I will see teenagers with fibromyalgia, and a lot of them are a bit distressed, and they've seen many physicians. I had one recently. I just finished another pain book, and I have a picture of that high school kid in there. He came to see me, and I took a picture of him. He gave me permission. Drugs, just 20 medications he was on. Had been going to a pain doctor. Oh yeah, I finally got him off. He's unaddicted now, and a very intelligent child. But he was diagnosed as fibromyalgia, but people didn't really clearly make a clear diagnosis, which I think was a minor depression and anxiety. I understand too that it's rare to have a depression in a child below age 13, but it really picks up at the menarche, and it doubles in girls immediately. And so teenagers indeed do get depression, and it can, be missed quite easily. But mothers usually are pretty sensitive to it, but suppose they have the same problem. You were speaking earlier of having 4 children. I wrote a book called Welcome to Your Mind Body, Effects of the Mind on the Body. And I put a graph on there, and actually like fibromyalgia, irritable bowel, headaches, 10 times more common in women than men. Absolutely. It's related, and you agree with that, Teresa?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's due to the high responsibility. I mean, just look at yourself, 4 kids and you're working, you know what I mean? And then for a lot of families, then the real kid comes home and he expects dinner to be ready, and you've had no time to relax. And many of these fibromyalgia, irritable bowel headaches, I see depression, I see a lot more common in women. And you've seen that also, Teresa.
It's much more prevalent in women, and it's because exactly what you said. And to go to Colleen's statement about her 4 children, how wonderful, And I'm a mom of 2 sons, one who will be 27 tomorrow, and a granddaughter, and they're different. But it's just an awareness and being aware of what's going on. Sometimes we overreact and sometimes we underreact. Some parents are perfectly okay with a child locking themselves in their room playing Nintendo. Is that correct? Nintendo or these
No, it's the Wii
hours
now.
and the Wii.
It's the Wii.
Yeah, but I don't have a problem with if it's the exercise Wii. Just things to stimulate them, and kids isolating. And some of our kids are gonna feel blue, and we feel blue.
Yeah.
But is looking at being aware, having that open communication. And a lot of our kids are affected by their diet. And I'm not saying that with just Colleen sitting here or you.
Yeah.
They're eating chips and candy and all these kind of things and energy drinks, and those clearly impact, our serotonins and our dopamines and our energy level. And maybe we're looking at depression, and maybe it's just that they need to get stimulated.
Yeah, I think we're seeing definitely increased rates of depression in teenagers and increased obesity, and we're lucky to have Colleen with us, and maybe she could tell us a little bit about her vegan diet. And I've written 5 books on proper eating and how important it is. I mean, I'm seeing in my office 1 out of 3 patients that I see today have type 2 diabetes, and the horrible diseases that follow that. From blindness to dementia, much higher rate of dementia in type 2 diabetics, strokes. Incidentally, if you have a stroke, especially the left hemisphere, generally it runs at 40% depression rate. Wow. I didn't realize it was that high. 40% because it affects the frontal lobe, and a very high rate of depression and strokes. And they're laying there paralyzed, maybe they can't talk, and we won't even notice it. So people have to pay attention. Treating people with vascular disease and with diabetes. But Colleen, tell us a little about. I mean, I teach 4 ways of eating, from the vegetarian to the vegan to the flexitarian, where you eat 80%, the vegan way, or the nutritarian, high-dense nutrient foods. Or Dr. Furman, my friend, who I want to thank him for putting my name on back of his last book, End of Diabetes, incidentally, came out a month ago. But Colleen, tell us a little bit about your experience, because you look great, look like you feel great, and tell us your secrets.
Well, I think the also called SAD, the Sad American Diet, the Standard American Diet. I really think that so much of the way we feel is about what we eat. And it's not just eating things that are bad for you, but it's the micronutrients that you're not getting, in our nutrient depleted foods that are so overprocessed coming out of the package. I always say, if you can read the package to see what's in it, then already, you're kind of missing the boat. And the fresh food with the antioxidants and the phytochemicals and all the enzymes that we need in our brain and in our body, it's the micronutrients that we're missing. We're overfed and yet malnourished. So I think that diet plays a huge part. And I think really very little is caused by any one factor. It's diet, what you're eating, what you're not eating, genetics. Certain of us are predisposed, and it just takes the right things to stimulate it. Your environment, a lot of, even like we were talking about salmon and a lot of fish, where there's a lot of heavy metals and mercury that's coming in the food. So there's so many components to the diet, and I just believe personally that the number one thing is less processed food. Whether you're vegan and choose to avoid animal products, there's reasons to do that, and there's reasons not to. I don't think there's a one-size-fit-all diet. I think no diet is perfect, which is why following up, as you said, with tests and to see, if you do have the correct levels of things in your blood. But no diet is perfect. Unprocessed foods, no matter what you're eating, things that don't come out of a package, things that are as close to the original form as you can. I would say that that's my number one goal with my kids. Certainly they didn't wake up vegan and I try to cook for them. Yeah. But if I can just keep the fast food and the massive amounts of candy that they come home with in their pockets every day, if I can just get them to avoid that, I feel like I'm way ahead of the game.
Yeah, and avoid the fructose corn syrup of sugary drinks. Because fructose is metabolized in the liver, immediately converted to fat. You want to have fat teenagers, let them drink a lot of sugary drinks. And I think you mentioned the word nutrient dense. That's really the point. People don't, what does that mean, Dr. Cashman? Nutrient dense means vitamins, minerals, that's about 30 added together, and 25,000 phytochemicals, plant chemicals. You want to be eating foods of color in their fresh state. You can add onions and mushrooms on top of that because they don't have color, but they're full of phytochemicals. Like an apple, I have 500 phytochemicals. Strawberry, perhaps 700. And then maybe blueberry, about 800. It is the interaction of these vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals, the symphony, the rainbow of their interaction that lead to good physical and mental health.
My kids have learned to eat a rainbow. Every meal, if there's no color in it, then figure something out. You got to get more color. I think that's a great rule for kids.
What a lovely statement. And also tell parents, don't argue with your child about the food. You buy it, you're in charge of it. When they get hungry, they'll eat it. If you make a big fight about it every time, it's not going to work.
As a parent, picky is proportional to choice. When a kid gets hungry enough, I have so many friends, and we all raise our kids differently, but my child won't eat that, and my child won't eat that. Well, they won't eat it because you didn't make it, because you didn't think that they would eat it. And we're teaching our kids so wrong messages. We teach them in school about nutrition, and then every restaurant you go to, it has a kids menu that comes separate with chicken nuggets, hot dogs, French fries, nothing green, nothing of any value, and ice cream or chocolate milk. And that's at every restaurant, almost anywhere. Yeah,
and this is interesting because I brought in one of my talks. I don't know if you heard or not, but you know how many ingredients chicken McNuggets have, and they have to add a spray to make it taste like chicken. 39 ingredients, and it's perverse. It's perverse, and there can't be anything healthy about that. Let's talk about supplements a little bit, though. Are there any supplements that you recommend patients to take, Colleen or Teresa? That you keep in mind?
There are supplements out there, but they need to be in conjunction with medical care. Because some of the supplements can be very detrimental. People have this thing, if I put in these energy drinks, it's got the B1s and echinacea, all this kind of things, they can be just as damaging. Putting those things, because a lot of times we just avoid them. So you need to, Are St. John's worts helpful? Yes. You know, the echinacea for our immune system, some of those are helpful, but you have to be as cautious with those as well because they have some adverse ingredients. They're not, sometimes some of those are not the pure. So you have to be careful with those.
Yeah, I mean, certain things that I think most people would agree with. And I mean, I know people who take 100 supplements and they're not healthy. They have neuropathies and things, and I try to explain to them, they don't get it. They don't want to give them up. But some people can't even walk with so many supplements. We're talking about big stuff here. And vitamin D is one you should be taking. You know, absolutely. Vitamin D3, 2,000 units at least. Some need more. Get your blood checked is very important. It prevents inflammation. One cause of depression is inflammation. And diabetics especially are much more prone to get inflammation. And so a proper diet is extremely important. If you don't want to get out in that sunshine, then take a supplement. I take vitamin D. Another big one is omega-3. We have essential fatty acids. You don't want to eat a no-fat diet. You need to eat about, at least Americans eat a 40% fat diet. Well, that's too much fat. 97% of fat gets stored on your buttocks or your belly within 4 hours. Oils, which are 100% fat, including olive oil, get deposited in your blood in 4 minutes. I didn't know that till recently. That
Wow.
quickly. But so need some essential fatty acids, omega-3s. We have omega-6s, which are more inflammatory, omega-3s, which are anti-inflammatory. Americans eat about 15 omega-6s to omega-3s. That's an inflammatory diet. We need about 1 to 1. And how you can increase the essential fatty acids, fish oil would be a good example. Flax seeds you can add to a smoothie that you have in the morning, which are very healthy incidentally. But why are smoothies healthy? They're full of phytochemicals. They taste great, very healthy for you. And I put some flaxseed in there, or some omega-3 in there, and when you break it down into chemical names, DHA and EPA, you can get it as a supplement in a health food store, about 1,000 milligrams. I take one of those, a small capsule. I take one of those every day, and the vitamin D is even smaller. I don't like those big fish oil capsules. I get claustrophobia. I feel like I'm going to choke. But these are smaller, and especially the vitamin D I'm taking is a very small capsule, easy to swallow. I think those are important supplements, maybe a multivitamin. And if you're very strong vegan, for example, and I know you told me your story, to take some B12 supplement would be important. Although I personally think you'd pick it up somewhere, but you had a deficiency, didn't you?
I did.
And so tell us, in terms of your supplements, any thoughts that you have from what I said or Teresa said?
I've learned my lesson. You know, when I went vegan, I was going to stand on the hill that says, you know, I can get everything that I need from plants, and that's why I think that never is any diet perfect. And a lot of times people that eat kind of the standard American diet say, well, where do you get your protein? And we could go into that for a long time, but those diets have too much cholesterol and saturated fat, you know, so the vegan diet, in my experience, and it could be because of my genetic background, I don't store vitamin D. My B12 stores got very low about 2 years in, because as you know, B12 stays in our body for a long time, so it can take a while for those deficiencies to show up. I actually did get tested, and I had, of course it was February in Fort Wayne, so who's not suffering then, but I had 0 vitamin D, my B12 was absolutely gone, and I asked for that test where they did the blood work, and it came, and before that I was diagnosed with depression. And that was for me kind of, I've done that before and taken the antidepressant, and sometimes it helps a little bit, but I asked for the nutritional counseling, and I discovered that indeed I was deficient. So I take fish oil, which is not vegan, but I feel more comfortable with that than being depressed and having to take medication for that. So I take the fish oil, I take the B12, I have a shot that I do about once a month, just maintenance, and then I have the vitamin D, because again, I think the doctor that diagnosed me said something like 30% of certain populations their bodies don't store the vitamin D, and so having that as a supplement is very important.
Yeah, so it's very few. It's very few supplements that we need to take, but lack of vitamin D can cause a major depression. And let's talk about prevalence of depression in the community. Women, on the average, if men say have 10% of depression, women has about 15% of the depression. And to be bipolar, that rate is even a bit less, is significantly less. And 16% of the people can have a recurrence, can have a major recurrence. Once they've had it, the recurrence rate goes up. And so the elderly become depressed. If they had it in the history, a lot of them forgot that history because they're older. They've forgotten. At age 25, incidentally, most likely the most common time to develop depression is after age 25.
Absolutely.
I read that, and that's your experience.
That's statistics support
and
that.
Is it a higher rate? I know you deal a lot with alcohol counseling. Is it a higher rate in alcoholics, depressive episodes, because of the alcoholism, or do you have to treat that too when you
we have to look at both. And clearly depression could be screaming its ugly roar out there, but it could clearly be induced by the chemicals they used. Mm-hmm. Taking those chemicals out, that may, with supplements and exercise, that may rectify the situation. On the other hand, there's many people that are dual diagnosed. Mm-hmm. And so you have to work with both of those. Mm-hmm. Many folks have self-medicated because the mania and the impulsivity and the bipolar and the seasonal, and that's the way they addressed it. So we have to get them off the self-medication, but just more of an awareness. Life changes.
Let's talk about suicide a little bit in the elderly, the teenagers, and what are the symptoms that a parent, say in a child, and I know of a very good friend recently lost a child through suicide, and it's not uncommon. We have probably 15,000, almost 20,000 people a year committing suicide, and I think the number is even a little higher than that. So we like to, what are the symptoms? You have a family member, say you have a child or a spouse or an adult in the family. What are some clues?
Some of it is whether there's a sadness. This incredible sadness and the isolation and always obsessing about or talking about or thinking about death and looking at negativity and pessimism and losing interest. It's very similar to depression, losing interest in things that they always were interested in. Making comments about I'm worthless, I'm hopeless, and low self-esteem comments. Then the scary things come in. More scarier things is where they look like that they are putting their affairs in order, where they suddenly go from a switch to the hopelessness, the dark, the pessimism, the isolation, to suddenly being very charismatic. And I've seen that with peers, and many of us don't pick it up, because it's like, oh, it's great. Things are going well, and it's just an awareness.
He's getting better, and actually they're making plans. And it's just an awareness, talking about suicide, visiting or calling people that they may not have done previously. And those are just awareness things. And you see that in teenagers, they especially get their weapons out of the house. Because
for everyone.
For everyone, at any age, you got to be concerned.
Exactly.
And we know from TV these things are very hard to predict, but we have to pay attention.
Absolutely.
And especially in the elder, the spouse just died, for example. I mean, you come right down to it. I mean, 60 years being married to this wonderful person, and they die. I mean, you got to, and we know from statistics, as you mentioned earlier, on stress testing, and that losing a spouse is at the top of the list. Losing a job is number 2 of the things that cause stress, and a lack of purpose in life. And that's, in a way, I feel so lucky. I'm not exactly 39, or did I say I was? But I got a purpose in life. Just what we're doing here. I suggested to people retire. And this is, I think, a good point to mention. If you're going to retire, that's fine. But you better know what your purpose in life is going to be after that. You're going to volunteer at the church, or you're going to help the Boys or Girl Scouts or whatever. But I'd have something in mind. I know of people that worked 35 years at General Motors, and had their heart attack at their retirement party or commit suicide a month later. The death rate following retirement is high. Absolutely. And it's nowhere near as high as people who have a purpose. So I think, and even with cancer patients, Dr. Lashang wrote many books on that he could double the lifespan of people if they could develop a purpose in life. Mm-hmm. And that's actually one of the treatments, one of the non-medication treatments for depression, is to turn the person in the direction of doing something, getting to work, to make a complete turnaround, and all of a sudden they have to get up in the morning and do something. That reduces depression. Plus the exercise, walking in the sunshine outside, eating the right food, teaching them not to ruminate. Remember I said through evolution, we tend to accumulate negativity to get people over that. And one way of doing it is a very interesting subject that interests me a little bit, is mindfulness. Mm-hmm. I use it to treat for pain treatment, to become mindful of what we're doing. It's a stress reducer. For example, you're a housewife, you're doing the dishes. Look at the dishes. Mm-hmm. Look at the forks and the spoons, and pay attention to exactly what you're doing. Look at your fingers, and that's mindfulness. Look at your children. Look at them in the eye, and walk through your yard. A lot of people have a yard and they get 100 trees and they never looked at them. I found myself doing that. So one day, I looked at every tree. I looked at the nuts. I looked at the leaves, the shape of the leaves, and I tell you, I felt great after I was doing that. Interesting enough, last year, this is a kind of a cute story. I had a cousin visiting from New York, and he knew trees very well. You know what we did? We went to the Notre Dame campus. I didn't go to school there. And I just love that campus. I love the bookstore. And we went and looked at every tree on the Notre Dame campus.
Wow.
And if you go to their chapel, we sat there, nobody in the church except him and I, and then we went back in the grotto, and you read the letter there of Dooley. Read it sometime. Every time I read it, I seem to read something else to it. You know what he regretted the most? Is having been at the Notre Dame campus, and during the Korean War and stuff, they all made him go to bed at 10, and he even had been a soldier. He couldn't stay up at midnight or whatever. Is that what I regret the most? I never looked at the campus. And most of them in our lives, we never really look at children in the eye. We don't really look at what's around us, Take your living room for a minute. Describe to me the things that are in it. I'd have a hard time. What's the painting on the wall? We don't. That's mindfulness. Mindfulness is like meditation. You don't look at the past. You don't look at the future. It's very calming. If you look at pain that way, actually, you just don't decorate the pain with the past. You don't decorate the pain is less. So and Kobat Zen does a lot of that mindfulness teaching. I think he's got a big point, and it's a good way to get away from depression is to promote mindfulness.
Well, my question would be maybe for you as you treat depression, as you listen to what you're supposed to do. I've read a lot of books. I know about nutrition. I know that exercise is key outdoors. But when you're really depressed, you can't sometimes get there. And my question would be almost twofold. When you find yourself in that position where you understand what you're supposed to do, you just can't do it, or you see those same symptoms in a friend or a loved one, it's hard to know when to intervene. Like you talk about the suicide symptoms. It's hard to know when to intervene. Most of us are willing to reach out and offer, but you can't make someone take your hand. And then twofold, sometimes you don't have the strength to reach out. So what's the lowest thing you can do to reach out for help, whether it be for someone else or for yourself, if you just can't find the mindfulness?
Depression can be debilitating. And when you say, well, you need to do this and you need to do that, and you have people that can't figure out, excuse me, how to get out of bed. Mm-hmm. And just to be there. Our society is pessimistic. We're not there enough for people. Some people just want somebody to listen to them or say, hey, Colleen, I care about you today. Simple as that. To say, hey, let's go for a walk. To just be aware.
I think it's great advice. You know, I've made, took an interest really in the Amish community. And they have, you know, I operated on somebody, like a tumor a few months ago. She must have had 100 people. I anticipated that. So I put it in an auditorium at Lutheran Hospital and made a show out of it. Then I invited myself to pull the stitches at our house at Lake George, opposite the road to the right. Went to the house. I pulled the stitches. 50 people are watching me pull the stitches. Now, I operate brain tumors, and I take them out of the base of the brain, but pulling stitches is something I don't do. So that was embarrassing enough. But 50 people are watching me. But when you watch them, you see they have very little trouble with depression. And the reason is they live this far apart. We're living 1,000 miles apart today. They're very, very close. You see them in a buggy. They're an inch apart. And it was a very fascinating thing to watch. And that's a problem in our society today. There's not enough closeness. That's why belonging to a club or church or an organization has great healing value. But in some of these, I think the thing you mentioned about visiting someone's home and just being at the bedside to get some of the closeness and some of the love or a hug, just a hug is worth a lot of dopamine.
And I think you said it in one of your talks that I heard. Sometimes, if you're the one that's depressed, one easy thing to do is reach out to someone else and see someone else's pain, because maybe that's all you can do. But when you do that, you shift the focus away from your own pain, and that might give you the strength, if you see someone else is in need, to make that call, and then suddenly you feel a little brighter when you get off the phone.
And these patients we were talking about here, they're really severe. As you said, they need medication right away. Mm-hmm. They need medication right away. The thing about medication, though, and you tell me, Teresa, your experience, but my experience and reading about it, is most antidepressant medications take months to work.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't mean you can't at the same time work on the diet and exercise,
Absolutely.
finding something you do and taking them to church or to a movie and sitting there with an arm around them and give them some hope for the future. That you can do that at the same time. But medication can take months, right? And sometimes you got to switch them too.
Yes, and it has to be monitored, but there's lots of things you can do, and to be encouraging to the folks.
Yeah.
You know, there are people that, gee, you're telling me to exercise. I can't. I don't even feel like going to take a shower today.
Yeah.
I don't feel like doing these things. Is that if folks can just sit down every day and do a daily routine. If you get up in the morning, when you turn your head off that pillow and say, it's going to be a great day, good chance it's going to be. Mm-hmm. If you do meditations, you know, start the day, start the diet, having things, make sure that you're on the top of the list. Yeah. You know, I encourage my clients to say, every day reward yourself. I was so excited of this cup of water. Simple things, looking at the beauty of simple things. We look at the glass half empty, it's half full. Is looking at the positives of things.
It'll cause secretion of dopamine and
Absolutely.
serotonin. Yeah, I look my cats in the eye every morning. I describe their beautiful eyes to them.
There you are.
Of course, I think they understand me. It sure makes myself, you know, feel better to be mindful. But I remember Norman Vincent Peale was walking in Chicago going to give a lecture, and it was raining and snow, and it was it was a depressive day, it was a dark day, and this young black gentleman driving the limo up steps outside and says, isn't this the God most beautiful day you ever saw?
Absolutely.
I've been using that ever since.
Mm-hmm. It is.
I've been using that ever since.
Absolutely.
And what a wonderful statement. Also, sort of to summarize us here, I think one very important thing is the diagnosis and how this illness masquerades. And it's an illness. It's not just our thought process. It's a chemistry of our body based on our history, evolutionary history. And depression can hit anybody, any economic situation. The more common and economically deprived, and people who've had bad events, but they come up with a diagnosis, and you got to watch your kids, you got to watch your husband and your wife, and the elderly. Suicide, tremendous a number of people in this country commit suicide, and I want to thank you, Teresa and Colleen, for coming aboard here, having this discussion. I think people are watching this today. I think you have an idea of what we're talking about, and I encourage you to read some books and follow our other mind-body connections. We have a lot of things where we speak about proper eating and nutrient-dense eating, and Colleen is an expert on that. And sometime we're going to need to listen to her description how to eat in a restaurant and plan ahead. I tell you, I laugh so hard. Our next show, I think, will be on addiction. We'll have another show on that. It's something that interests me. And we have a lot about the mind-body connection. I notice in my field in medicine all these years that I'd say 75% of the people I'm looking at, all they need is a coach. They don't need injection. They don't need a medication. They need somebody to give them a hug, talk to them, and teach them how to eat right, how to think right. And your thoughts are a reflection of your mind. And what you eat every day, how you think every day is going to determine your health. And I think we'll have a show soon on the vegan diet. Just one of the 4 that I recommend, and you're just a great example of it, because it leads to physical health and mental health. People who don't eat right have a much higher rate of dementia, much higher rate of depression. So I also wrote a book on how to live to be 100. You can get it on Amazon. It's probably worth reading. And to be of sound mind and good health, which a lot of us diet related. Again, I thank you very much. I love you all, and thank you, Teresa, Colleen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Frankly, I really enjoyed the show.
It was fun.
Yes, it was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you.